Nathan Carter had seen his fair share of battles, but he never expected his toughest fight to be over something as ridiculous as trash cans. After serving in the military for over a decade, he had finally settled into a peaceful, quiet life in a suburban neighborhood. His home wasn't a mansion, but it was his sanctuary, a modest, well-kept house with a neatly trimmed lawn and a backyard that gave him just enough space to relax. The American flag swayed gently from the front porch, a silent reminder of the discipline and resilience that had shaped him. Nathan was the kind of man who believed in rules, real rules that protected people. But the homeowners association? That was another story. The HOA in his neighborhood was notorious for its absurd regulations and heavy-handed enforcement. And at the center of it all was her, Karen Whitmore, self-appointed queen of the HOA and the neighborhood's biggest busybody. With her iron grip on the board and a clipboard that never left her side, Karen took pleasure in micromanaging everything. From mailbox colors to grass length, nothing escaped her scrutiny. Nathan had kept a low profile for the most part. He had no patience for HOA politics, and as long as they left him alone, he had no reason to pick a fight. But that all changed the morning he stepped outside and noticed something was missing. His trash cans, both of them, were gone. At first, he thought maybe the wind had knocked them over or some teenager had pulled a stupid prank. But as he walked around, scanning the street, he saw them. Right there in Karen's driveway, neatly stacked beside her house. His trash cans. Nathan narrowed his eyes. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." He marched straight over, knocking firmly on the door. Moments later, Karen opened it, dressed in her usual pastel sweater set, her expression smug as ever. "Good morning, Nathan," she said sweetly, as if she hadn't just stolen his property. Nathan crossed his arms. "Karen, why are my trash cans on your property?" She let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head. "Oh, those? They were a violation." "A violation?" He scoffed. "For what?" "Being trash cans." Karen tilted her chin up. "For being unsightly and not properly labeled with your house number. The HOA requires all trash bins to be stored out of sight and clearly marked. It's in the bylaws." Nathan clenched his jaw. "So instead of letting me know, you just took them?" "I was simply enforcing the rules," she said with a satisfied smile. "You'll have them back once you pay the fine." "Fine." Nathan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You stole my trash cans, and now you want me to pay to get them back." "It's not stealing, Nathan. It's HOA policy," she chirped. "If you'd like to discuss it further, you're welcome to bring it up at the next board meeting." Nathan took a deep breath, trying to keep his temper in check. He had dealt with stubborn commanders, arrogant officers, and the chaos of war, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer audacity of an HOA Karen on a power trip. He exhaled slowly. "I'll be taking my trash cans now." Karen blocked the doorway. "Not until you pay the fee." Nathan stared at her, his patience wearing dangerously thin. He wasn't about to let some overzealous HOA president extort him over garbage bins. Without another word, he stepped around her, grabbed his cans, and started rolling them back to his property. "You're making a mistake, Nathan," Karen called after him, her voice dripping with condescension. "Noncompliance leads to additional fines." Nathan didn't even turn around. Let her try. As he secured his trash cans behind his fence, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. HOA's first power move. Nathan had barely finished his morning coffee when he noticed something taped to his front door. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach as he pulled it off and read the bold, capitalized letters at the top. Notice of violation. His eyes scanned the details and his jaw clenched. Infraction, improper trash bin storage. Fine, $250 first offense. Additional consequences. Noncompliance will result in increased penalties and potential legal action. Nathan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He had expected Karen to push back, but this? A fine for taking back his own trash cans? Before he could even process his next move, a familiar voice rang out. "Good morning, Nathan." He turned, and sure enough, there was Karen, striding toward him with her usual smug expression, clipboard in hand. "I see you got your notice," she said cheerfully. "I trust you'll be making your payment soon?" Nathan stared at her, incredulous. "Karen, you stole my trash cans, and now you expect me to pay you?" She gasped dramatically. "Stole? Oh no, Nathan. I was simply enforcing community standards." "This is extortion," he shot back. Karen sked. Now. There's no need to be so hostile. If you have a problem, you're welcome to appeal at the next HOA board meeting." Nathan folded his arms. "That's cute, Karen. But I won't be paying a cent. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, her fake smile faltered. That would be unfortunate, she said, her tone laced with warning. Nathan didn't flinch. He had dealt with actual threats before. Karen's passive-aggressive intimidation was laughable in comparison. Have a great day, Karen. He turned and walked back into his house, shutting the door behind him. By the next morning, the HOA had escalated. Another letter arrived, this time from an attorney representing the association. Nathan read through the ridiculous document, shaking his head. Failure to comply with HOA regulations may result in additional fines, legal proceedings, and potential liens against your property. He let out a low chuckle. They really think they can scare me with this nonsense? But Karen wasn't done. A few hours later, he spotted a city inspector standing in front of his house, clipboard in hand, talking to none other than Karen herself. Nathan stepped outside. Everything all right here? The inspector turned to him. Sir, we received a complaint about a possible violation on your property. Nathan shot Karen a look. Oh, let me guess, trash cans? Karen folded her arms. I'm simply reporting community violations. The inspector hesitated. Actually, this complaint involves structural concerns. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Structural?
The inspector flipped through his notes.
Yes.
Something about an unapproved fence modification. Nathan almost laughed. You mean the fence board I replaced last month? Karen gasped dramatically. Unauthorized modifications are strictly against HOA policy. Nathan shook his head, turning to the inspector. Is this really worth your time? The man sighed. Honestly?
No.
But I have to check it out. Nathan led him to the fence. The inspector took one look and sighed. Yeah, this is ridiculous. There's nothing wrong here. Karen's expression twisted. Are you sure? We must maintain the integrity of the community. The inspector shot her an annoyed look. Ma'am, it's a fence board. I'm not filing anything over this. Nathan smirked. Well, looks like that's settled. Karen huffed, spinning on her heel. This isn't over. Nathan watched her storm off and chuckled. Didn't think it would be. As the inspector walked away, Nathan knew one thing. Karen was escalating, and this was just the beginning. She thought she could bully him into submission. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The HOA escalates the conflict. Nathan had barely settled into his evening routine when his phone buzzed. It was a notification from his home security system. He tapped the app and frowned. The camera feed showed a figure walking up to his house, clipboard in hand.
Karen.
Nathan sighed.
What now?
He stepped outside just in time to see Karen pinning yet another notice to his door. Evening, Karen, he said, arms crossed. She turned, feigning surprise. Oh, Nathan. I was just leaving you a friendly reminder about your outstanding fines. He pulled the paper off his door and scanned it. Notice of secondary violation. Infraction. Unauthorized trash bin placement. Structural modifications. General noncompliance. Fine, $750, pending additional enforcement actions. Nathan let out a low whistle. $750, huh? You must really be hurting for money. Karen's smile tightened. This is about maintaining order, Nathan. Rules exist for a reason. He shook his head. Rules exist to keep things fair. This is harassment. Karen pursed her lips. If you're struggling financially, the HOA does offer a payment plan. Nathan chuckled. Oh, you think this is about money? No, Karen. This is about principle. She lifted her chin. Then you'll be receiving another notice soon, along with a formal hearing with the HOA board. Nathan's patience snapped. You know what, Karen? Go ahead. Fine me all you want. But before you do, you might want to check your own house. Karen faltered. Excuse me? Nathan pulled out his phone and tapped the screen, bringing up a folder labeled HOA Hypocrisy. He turned the screen toward her. Photos of Karen's backyard filled the display, her fence badly in need of repairs, a rusting shed clearly violating HOA policy, and an old car parked in her driveway without an approved cover. Karen's face paled. Where did you get those? Public sidewalk, Karen. If you can report my property, I can report yours. Her expression hardened. This is different. Nathan smirked. Sure it is. Karen turned abruptly and stormed away, but Nathan could tell he had shaken her. The next day, he received another letter, only this time, it was more than just a fine. Notice of intent to lien. Nathan blinked at the paper. They're actually threatening my property now? His gut burned with frustration, but something about this felt off. The HOA could issue fines, but placing a lien? That required a process, and Karen was skipping steps. Nathan started digging. After a few hours of researching HOA bylaws, he found something interesting. Karen had been issuing arbitrary fines, and worse, there were discrepancies in the HOA's financial records. Some homeowners had mysteriously paid off their violations after negotiations with Karen. His fingers drummed on the desk. So that's her game? That evening, he met with a neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 2 decades. When he asked her about the HOA, she shook her head. Karen's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for years, she said. She fines whoever she wants, and if you pay her under the table, your violations just disappear. Nathan's eyes darkened. So she's extorting people, he said. Mrs. Thompson hesitated, then nodded. No one's been able to prove it. But if you can, you be doing us all a favor. Nathan sat back, his mind racing. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry control freak. She was running a scam. And now, she had messed with the wrong guy. The HOA oversteps, and the protagonist strikes back. Nathan wasn't the type to sit back and let someone walk all over him, especially not some HOA dictator drunk on power. Karen had escalated this into a full-blown war, and now, it was time for him to strike back. He spent the next day gathering evidence. Every letter, every fine, every ridiculous violation Karen had issued, it all went into a neat folder. But that wasn't all. He started talking to other homeowners, asking if they had experienced similar harassment. Turns out he wasn't alone. Several neighbors had been hit with outrageous fines, many of which mysteriously disappeared once they had a private discussion with Karen. Others had received unofficial legal threats, similar to the one Nathan had gotten. But the real kicker? A retired couple on the next street had nearly lost their home because of Karen's shady enforcement tactics. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. This was fraud. Nathan needed a solid game plan, and he had just the thing in mind. That afternoon, he heard a loud rumbling outside. He stepped onto his porch and froze. A tow truck was backing into his driveway. What the hell? The driver hopped out and checked a clipboard. Got an order to tow a non-compliant vehicle. Nathan's stomach dropped. His truck, his vintage truck, the one he'd been restoring for years, was the target. And standing on the sidewalk, watching with folded arms and an infuriating smirk?
Karen.
Nathan clenched his fists and marched toward her. Karen, you better call this off right now. She didn't even blink. You were warned, Nathan. That eyesore has been violating community standards for months. Nathan laughed, cold and sharp. I have a permit for this truck. It's legally registered. You can't tow it. Karen shrugged. The HOA board disagrees. Nathan turned to the tow truck driver. Buddy, if you hook that up, you're participating in theft. This isn't legal, and I have the paperwork to prove it. The driver hesitated. Look, I'm just doing my job. Nathan pulled out his phone and hit record. Then do your job somewhere else. Because if that tow hook so much as touches my truck, I'm filing charges. The driver swore under his breath and turned back to Karen. Lady, I ain't getting involved in this. If it's illegal, I'm not towing. Karen's smug expression faltered. You're contracted by the HOA. The driver cut her off. Yeah, and I'm also not getting sued. Sort it out yourself. He climbed back into his truck and drove off. Nathan turned back to Karen, shaking his head. You just tried to steal my property. That's a crime, Karen. She straightened, jaw tight. You can't prove anything. Nathan smirked. Oh, but I can. He held up his phone, still recording. Karen's face drained of color. That's strike 1, Nathan said. And trust me, you won't survive strike 3. She turned on her heel and stormed off, but Nathan knew she was rattled. And that was exactly what he wanted. That night, Nathan put the final pieces of his plan together. He drafted an official complaint to the city, outlining Karen's illegal enforcement tactics. Then, he contacted a local investigative journalist who had been itching for a story on corrupt HOAs. But the best part? Nathan was about to take Karen down in the most public way possible. The upcoming HOA board meeting was about to get very, very interesting. Karen's final, desperate move. Nathan knew Karen was cornered, and desperate people did desperate things. He just didn't expect her to be this reckless. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the next evening, and Nathan had made sure the room would be packed. He had spread the word to every neighbor Karen had wronged, sent a tip to the local news station, and even hinted at some serious legal action in the works. Karen must have caught wind of it, because the very next morning, Nathan woke up to something that made his blood boil. His water was shut off. Nathan turned the faucet, nothing. He checked the shower, nothing. The hose outside, dry as a bone. And then he saw the notice taped to his door. Water service temporarily suspended due to unpaid HOA fines. Service will resume once balance is settled. Nathan laughed. A sharp, disbelieving laugh. This wasn't just an abuse of power, this was illegal. He pulled out his phone and dialed the city utilities department. Within minutes, he got confirmation. The HOA doesn't have the authority to shut off your water, sir. That's a city-controlled service. Bingo. He thanked the representative and hung up. Now he had her. Nathan stormed over to Karen's house. She was outside, clipboard in hand, casually chatting with a neighbor until she saw him. He held up the notice. Care to explain this, Karen? She put on her best fake sympathetic face. Oh, Nathan, I'm afraid that's out of my hands. The board approved. Don't even try it, he snapped. The city controls water service, not the HOA. You had no legal right to do this. Karen's mask slipped for just a second. Nathan stepped closer. I just got off the phone with the city. They're not happy. And do you know what happens when you illegally tamper with someone's utilities? She swallowed. You're being dramatic. You committed a crime, Karen. And I've got the proof. He held up his phone, showing the recorded conversation with the city rep. Karen's confidence wavered. Nathan smirked. You just handed me exactly what I needed. With that, he turned and walked away. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, the room was packed. Homeowners filled every seat, murmuring among themselves, while Karen sat stiffly at the front of the room, clearly on edge. The meeting began as usual, with Karen trying to keep up the charade of professionalism. But the moment they opened the floor for homeowner concerns, Nathan stood up. I have something to bring to the board's attention. Karen forced a smile. Nathan, this is hardly the time. He held up the city's notice. Did the HOA authorize the illegal shutoff of my water? Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's eyes darted around. That's a misunderstanding. Nathan wasn't finished. And while we're at it, let's talk about the fines you've been handing out. The ones that mysteriously disappear if people pay you off the books. The room erupted into hushed whispers. A few homeowners nodded, murmuring in agreement. Karen's face turned red. That's a lie. Nathan smirked. I have receipts. He pulled out a stack of documents, records of Karen's shady transactions, testimonies from neighbors, and a formal complaint he had already filed with the city. Karen's jaw clenched. Nathan leaned forward. You've been caught, Karen. The city is investigating, and if I were you, I'd start packing. The HOA president, Karen's right-hand crony, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a moment to do what? One homeowner snapped. Ignore this? She's been scamming us for years. Karen stood abruptly. I refuse to be slandered. The door to the meeting room swung open. A city official stepped inside, followed by two uniformed officers. Nathan grinned. Perfect timing. Karen Whitmore, the official said, holding a file. We need to have a discussion about multiple violations, including fraudulent fines, illegal utility tampering, and potential financial misconduct. The color drained from Karen's face. This is absurd. One of the officers motioned for her to step aside. Ma'am, we have some questions. Let's go. The room was dead silent as Karen, red-faced and seething, was escorted out of the building. Nathan sat back in his chair, watching as the tyrant finally got what was coming to her. HOA crumbles and Karen's downfall. Nathan sat back in his chair, arms crossed, watching the fallout unfold. Karen had spent years bullying homeowners, issuing fines like she was running her own kingdom.
But now?
She was done. The moment Karen was escorted out of the HOA meeting, the board members, previously loyal to her, looked shaken. Homeowners, fueled by years of frustration, erupted in anger. "This is exactly what we've been saying for years," one resident snapped. "She's been robbing us blind," another shouted. The HOA president, a balding man who had spent most of the meeting sweating bullets, cleared his throat. Now, let's all remain calm." "Calm?" Nathan scoffed. "Your president was just escorted out by law enforcement for fraud. That's not exactly a minor issue." The murmurs in the room turned into full-blown outrage. A woman in the back stood up. "I move to remove Karen from the HOA board immediately." "Seconded," another man said. The HOA president gulped. "We will need a formal vote for that." Nathan smirked. "Bylaws say a simple majority can force an emergency vote. Looks like your kingdom is falling apart." The president hesitated, but the pressure was too much. "All right. All in favor of removing Karen Whitmore as HOA president?" Hands shot up across the room. Nathan counted silently in his head. That was way over the majority. "It's decided," the president finally admitted. "Effective immediately, Karen Whitmore is removed from her position as HOA president." Cheers erupted. Nathan, satisfied, leaned back. One down, one to go. The next morning, he was sipping his coffee on the front porch when he saw it. A moving truck. Karen, looking completely unhinged, was overseeing the movers as they loaded furniture into the truck. Her once pristine yard was a mess, her perfectly manicured life crumbling in real time. Nathan watched for a moment before deciding to twist the knife. He walked over casually. "Morning, Karen." She whirled on him, eyes wild. "This is your fault." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Oh no. This is your fault." Karen pointed a shaking finger at him. You think you've won?" Nathan chuckled. "Karen, you're literally moving out. I'd say that's a pretty big win." She huffed, turning away. "I'll be back. Just wait." Nathan smirked. "I wouldn't count on it. The HOA is already reviewing every fine you ever issued. Might want to keep an eye out for some lawsuits." Karen's face twitched. Nathan tipped his coffee mug at her. "Good luck with that." He turned and strolled back toward his house, hearing Karen muttering angrily behind him. As he stepped onto his porch, a neighbor called out from across the street. "Nathan." He turned. The older man grinned. "I think we owe you a beer. You just saved this whole neighborhood." Nathan laughed. "I'll take you up on that." Karen was gone. The HOA was falling apart. And for the first time since he moved in, Nathan's home actually felt like home again. The HOA faces full legal consequences. Nathan wasn't the kind of man to leave a job half done. Taking down Karen was just the beginning. Now it was time to make sure the HOA faced the full weight of its corruption. The news of Karen's removal spread like wildfire, and it didn't take long for city officials to step in. With multiple complaints now filed, an official audit of the HOA's finances was underway. Nathan had already submitted every document, every receipt, and every testimony he had gathered. And what they found? It was worse than anyone imagined. 3 weeks later, a city representative held a town hall meeting to address the neighborhood. The HOA board, now under heavy scrutiny, sat stiffly at the front of the room as the official cleared his throat. "After conducting a full review of the HOA's financial records, we have found substantial evidence of misconduct," he announced. "This includes fraudulent fines, misappropriated funds, and unauthorized enforcement actions." The room was silent, but the tension was thick. The official continued. "As a result, the HOA will be fined for illegal financial practices. Additionally, any homeowner who is wrongfully fined will be entitled to reimbursement." A collective murmur swept through the crowd. Nathan smirked. "That's going to cost them." One of the HOA board members, an older woman who had always seemed to blindly follow Karen's orders, raised her hand timidly. What happens to us? The city official didn't hesitate. Board members who are involved in illegal enforcement will be held accountable. If we find evidence of criminal activity, charges will be filed. The HOA president, the same man who had tried to smooth things over when Karen got exposed, let out a long breath. So, what do we do now? The official glanced at the crowd. That's up to the homeowners. They have two choices: reform the HOA under new leadership and oversight, or dissolve it entirely. Nathan turned to the room. I say we put it to a vote. A neighbor raised a hand. Dissolve it. Another followed. And then another. Within seconds, the decision was clear. The HOA, the same organization that had terrorized the neighborhood for years, was finished. Cheers erupted. Nathan sat back, satisfied. Not only was Karen gone, but the corrupt system she built had crumbled with her. Justice had been served. Karen's personal downfall. Nathan had figured that once Karen was out of the HOA and exposed for her shady dealings, she would fade into obscurity. Maybe move to another neighborhood, start fresh, hopefully without a clipboard in hand. But karma had other plans. A few weeks after the HOA was dissolved, Nathan was running errands when he stopped by a local hardware store. He was picking up some supplies when a familiar, grating voice caught his attention. Excuse me, sir, but you can't park here without a permit. Nathan turned the corner, and there she was.
Karen.
But this time, she wasn't patrolling a pristine suburban street. She was wearing a cheap name tag, standing in front of a strip mall security kiosk. Nathan blinked. No way. Karen was working as a mall security guard. She hadn't seen him yet, but she was already in full HOA mode, lecturing some poor guy about the proper parking procedures for a space that was, in fact, completely unmarked. Nathan grinned. This was too good. He casually walked over and leaned against a post. Karen, that you? Karen spun around, and the moment her eyes landed on him, her expression soured. You. Nathan smirked. Didn't expect to see you here. What happened to running your little kingdom? Her face turned red. That's none of your business. Nathan chuckled. Oh, I think it is. You spent years handing out fines over trash cans, and now you're out here policing parking spaces. Karen clenched her jaw. I have a real job now. Nathan nodded slowly.
Mom, sure.
And let me guess, no power to issue fines anymore? She turned away. I don't have to listen to this. Nathan just laughed. Karma's a funny thing, huh? He said, walking away. Karen didn't respond. She couldn't, because for the first time, she was the one with no authority. And Nathan? He couldn't have asked for a better ending. Epilogue and final mic drop. With Karen gone and the HOA dissolved, the neighborhood finally felt like home again. The tension that had once hung over every front lawn and mailbox had vanished. No more ridiculous fines, no more absurd restrictions, just a peaceful, drama-free community. Nathan had never been one for celebrations, but after everything, his neighbors insisted on throwing a block party. It was a well-earned victory lap for everyone who had endured Karen's reign of terror. As the sun set, people gathered in front yards, grilling burgers, laughing, and swapping horror stories about HOA nonsense. Nathan stood on his porch, watching the festivities unfold, when a familiar voice called out. Hey, Nathan. He turned to see his neighbor, Mr. Thompson, holding out a piece of paper with a smirk. Nathan took it and glanced at the text. Notice of violation. Infraction. Excessive enjoyment of one's own property. Nathan snorted. You're kidding. Mr. Thompson grinned. Just a little neighborhood humor. Consider it a collector's item. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head as he crumpled the fake notice. For the first time since moving in, he could finally breathe. No HOA. No fines. No Karen. Just peace. And damn, it felt good.